Have you opened up your chakras and manifested abundance? Did you self-realize the absolute reality, godhood of no self? Did you go up the levels of consciousness towards moksha enlightenment to see the metaphysical nature of absolute reality? I swear, if you think you understood anything of what I just said so far, you're so lost. No, but for real, if you really want to understand what spirituality is about, then it's quintessential that we deconstruct the language surrounding it. Because the more you have concepts in your head, the more you have belief systems and words in your mind, the more likely it's you are simply deluding yourselves in narratives. My light just got off. Let me turn it on again. Isn't it so much nicer with light? The difference is really, the contrast is so amazing. The entire point of spirituality is to lose the narratives of the mind and become free from them. Spiritual concepts are mental poison, and the cure is really hard to get once you're deeply stuck in these conceptual frameworks. Some never find out and end up way worse than before they entered spirituality in the first place. So in this video, I'll give you the cure for spiritual, conceptual schizophrenia, so we can actually discern what's real and become free. Spiritual pretension is the biggest problem. People want to use spirituality to strengthen their sense of self. The idea of becoming a more spiritually advanced person, one day becoming a guru, teacher, or an enlightened being. But this way of thinking is absolutely contradictory to spirituality itself. The nature of truth is such that no word really can describe what is, or like what the reality is about, because each word is always a false representation of a real thing. If I try to describe you what a chair is, for example, a very ordinary object, there are a million different ways to define it. Actually, there are infinite different ways to define it, because a chair can have 4 legs or 8 legs. It can be made out of wood and can also be made out of plastic. It can take up wild different shapes. So there's no real way to identify definitionally what a chair is, but despite that, we simply recognize a chair when we see it. The same with spiritually advanced truths. When you start to make a certain realization about the nature of reality, for example, that everything is one, well then you can say a sentence like this: everything is one. Everything is the same. But really only you can determine the extent of this insight. Because understanding something intellectually and actually experiencing the understanding are two different things. When I started to have sensations of oneness for the first time, for example, where I felt like, okay, reality is all one, it's all one and the same, it also started with a lot of conceptual understanding. Like, the way I was trying to figure it out was always logical, because I love logical frameworks. It is so much fun to make really sense of things and not just make stupid claims without evidence. But there's actually also a conscious reaction from the body mind when you're confronted with any new truth, where a certain aspect of experience shifts, where it becomes almost like disturbing or uncomfortable to confront. It's like a realization. You see something and then you notice it's true. And it's a realization because it goes against what you thought to be true previously. And it's so immediate, it's so direct. And because you see it so clearly, you don't really have the room mentally anymore to doubt what you already know. It's just obvious. It's this inability to doubt what you know that makes it actually true. So if I tell you, try to doubt that 1 + 1 = 2, it is literally impossible. You can't doubt it. There's no way you can reason with it. And the same is true for the nature of reality. The problem is that the nature of reality is just so incredibly ginormous and ridiculously paradoxical that it will just seem silly or crazy from the outside if you didn't do the spiritual work. I can tell you truths that seem just so obvious to me now, but will seem absolutely crazy for a person who has never done any spiritual work. And that's the way things start to also feel very silly from any religion looking from outside in. They just seem silly from the outside, but often from the perspective of the person who, I'm not religious, but from the person in the community, he has such a more deeper understanding of what is actually happening. Even though, most people still remain deluded. It's still a big problem That's why most people also don't want to be confident about their beliefs or about things they noticed, because there's always this humility almost dragging you down, because you never want to actually be certain, because then you could be wrong. I can say, for example, extraordinary things with absolute certainty. I can say, I know that biological death isn't the end of existence. I know that there's absolutely no self and no control. I know the absolute unity of all things. I know that I, in each individual, is quite literally the god of their own reality. So, because I've thought about these things for my entire life, and I've spent so much time trying to prove me wrong on this, I have also gone through the emotional process of actually confronting myself with these truths, which is a lot of weird psychosomatic reactions where you have to confront yourself and your relationship with these ideas that feel uncomfortable. Now, I am super certain, like there's no way to be able to shake that. And it has to seem crazy, because from the position of not having done the work, the immediate reaction is you can never know these things. It's impossible to know these things. And it's this idea that it is impossible to know something that makes us believe in concepts and ideas. Because for something crazy, like a God realization, which means the realization that you as a human are actually God, well, it requires a complete untanglement of what society means when they say God, and your own personal understanding and experience with the term and the idea of it. To realize your own godhood immediately causes a lot of tensions for the ego. And I also think this is also where a lot of mental illness comes in, because something seems so overwhelmingly true and at the same time so unacceptable that something happens in the psyche and people get crazy. Because you also notice with a lot of crazy stuff, when you start to think about it, you have like a judgment about what others will say from your thought, what others will believe about your crazy realization. So even before you're talking or knowing it, you're already arguing with other people about it, because you know there will be societal repercussions for certain statements. Thinking you know things in general will just make you be judged by others. It's just the nature of having a position. Especially if you start to make extraordinary claims about your own godhood. Like, of course, this is going to get a lot of pushback, even from yourself. And to be 100% certain of it, for most people, is very, very difficult to do. And of course, a lot of people in the past have claimed some God realization, not that they are God, out of a place of pure narcissism, which is how these things most happen, most of the time. It's just... the ego loves to think that it is God. That is the problem. So realizing these truths that are just so obvious once you realize them is actually a deconstructive process of language. What does God really mean? What is God really if it does exist? And how can I recognize this truth with my own body, with my own experience, without needing any guru, without needing any teacher, and see it as obviously true as 1 + 1 = 2. All spiritual truths work like this, but most people get lost in the definitions of a thing. Instead of deconstructing spiritual concepts, people build more and more onto them. And this is disastrous. This is horrible, awful. It is a corruption of all spiritual teachings if you do not have the ability to realize that concepts like self-realization can't be known at all until actually reached. You always will try to aim for something you made up in your head that doesn't exist. So if you are like on the spiritual path and you have heard about these terms, self-realization, enlightenment or whatever, the moment you think about it as a goal to reach, you corrupt it because you can't know what it actually means. Like you have some direction, but the moment you label it, oh, I want to become self-realized, what you're doing is you're creating a mental image of what it means to be self-realized without having the ability at all to do that. You just can't do that. So you're automatically falling into a delusion. So this is why it can be helpful once you past a certain point in the spiritual journey to understand, okay, this is the path that I went through. But if you haven't been there yet, making any claims is awful. And if you're making claims when you make claims without having been there yet, you're on the delusion of knowledge, and it's actually a belief. And to then question this is also very emotionally damaging. all striving towards some spiritual realization paradoxically makes it so that you'll never get there because you are imagining a destination that just doesn't exist. Same is true for ideas like ego death. If you take psychedelics in high dosages for the first time, it's not unlikely that you won't know that you are having an ego death. And it can even be the case that years passed and you never even know that you've had it because you just have no way to compare it to. It is just only your own experience. So what the hell is going on? It is not something you can easily categorize. So, of course, only in retrospect, you're able to maybe label and determine things. It's the same with all spiritual insights. Only once you've gained any understanding are you actually able to qualify what it means. The problem is that belief systems, ideas, and frameworks, and to a certain extent even desires of manifestations, cause exactly the opposite. They strengthen your ego, therefore strengthening your identity and making you more rigid in your beliefs and not being able to deconstruct yourself. Because you actually need to let go of all of these things you think are so important to you. Making you buy deeper and deeper into the illusion of a separate self, if you can't let go of these things. Even the entire notion that one belief is false and another is wrong and the other is true makes it impossible to realize full non-duality that is on the ultimate level. Because there are fundamentally only divisions in the mind. And all of these divisions in the mind need to get mended. If you're not able to actually dissolve a duality you have intellectually, like if you think there has to be a clear difference between this and that, there might actually be a difference, but then to also see why there's not a difference is the way out. And it is very difficult intellectually to do for most people. The worst thing about these contradictions is that they actually increase your suffering. Because cognitive dissonance itself feels disturbing. When there are two contradictory things, it's not comfortable. And if you are not good in like flexibility with the mind, well, then you start to want to deny one part of your cognitive dissonance. So you're pushing a part of you away, which creates a bunch of negative feelings about yourself. They even might be a cause, like the way you process trauma might get suppressed for your life, which changes everything. And yeah, you're stuck there and you kind of need someone else or some life situation that brings this up again in you. But if one is smart, one can actually completely do this on your own. You just simply need to respond with cognitive dissonance with genuine curiosity, like just an intuitive curiosity. When you want to understand what you are clearly not really understanding, then you can move forward. But if you assume you understand, then yeah, it's more in the realm of beliefs and all of disaster happens. But for this, it is super important that you even trust in your ability that you can understand something on your own. But if you think there are some people who are enlightened teachers out there who know everything and that they are above you because of their spiritual insight, then you can't really know anything. Because again, you have created an identity divide. And you're not believing that you can actually know the truth, that you are worthy of finding out your true nature. Because other gurus, they know something you don't, and they've done whatever work they've done. So you are always going to doubt your own realizations if they don't fit with theirs, because you think you're lower than them. And if you get some deep misunderstanding about spirituality or spiritual truth, well, then it creates even stronger attachment to the guru, to the idea, and to the delusion. If this happens, you can get your identity stuck in awful positions for years, because the spiritual journey is far, far deeper than one is able to understand or predict. Like the depth of awakening and insight that actually happens when you're actually in the process is so crazy deep. Reality has infinite depth to it. There are infinite ways one can look at a situation and reality itself. Language uses this ability to frame things in a certain way, but if you're not able to tap into this infinite potential, you will limit yourself and not even notice it, making you more miserable in the process. And this misery will make you lose more and more hope in the spiritual path, or that any of this is actually true. Like it might all be a scam, and there's actually no point to anything of this, and there are no paths, and it is all just suffering to the end, and that's just not true. And in a very paradoxical way, there's actually a path that leads to somewhere. And This is the fundamental tension in spirituality and language and culture. And just duality as a whole. Because I love language. I love discussing things. I love debate. Arguments and logical reasons are so much fun to me. So it's also not right to simply dismiss all spiritual concepts as a waste of time. Or my entire channel wouldn't make sense. All I do is talk and communicate my ideas with words or concepts. It's simply super important that both receive the information from a similar framework, that they understand how to hold language, how to hold words. Because I can say widely contradictory things, and they might seem stupid if one has not done the deep mental work for themselves. For example, I can say, I know everything with absolute complete confidence, because the knowledge is simply the knowing presence of all things. It's not some encyclopedia knowledge, of course not. I simply know the nature of reality without a shred of a doubt, and I feel embodied in that. I feel certain in my experience of reality. And having said all this, in my next breath, I can say, I know absolutely nothing. I don't know nothing about reality. I'm a simple human who has no idea of the cosmic proportions of it all. There's truly nothing that I truly know, as all sensations are ephemeral sensations that come and go incredibly fast. The present moment is a moment I can not hold on to, and my life is really nothing but a speck of dust. If I was any other animal, life would be looking very different, and I have no idea how this is like. So depending on the moment, I might say one or the other, but both of them are 100% true, and I embody both of them fully. Because you can intuitively grasp the paradox of non-duality. It is just something that makes sense. And I do think that if you're watching this, you likely understood what I just said. There's no contradiction here at all, even though if it sounds contradictory, but here you can see the nature of truth. It can embody multiple aspects of itself. Reality is a deeply paradoxical thing. And if you get overly concerned with logic, and you don't see the logic is itself paradoxical too, which it is, it has to be, well, if you don't see that, then you become close-minded. There's a certain hyper-rationality that if it gets too much control over you, it shuts off the idea to conceptualize paradox or to integrate paradox. And then it becomes just dogmatic, which is what a lot of hardcore militant atheists have become, or a lot of rationalists have become. Logic needs to be a much more holistic system, where multiple frames of logic can exist at the same time. The same that there are multiple ways to define a chair. Of course, if we want to have a conversation about something meaningful, for example, when I say the word God, it is important that we find definitions of some sort that makes us both understand what we are talking about, to the best of our abilities at least. Although, of course, it will be difficult, because the meaning of the word is bound by your personal associations with it. If you come from a very strong religious background, which happens for many, well, then there might be a very negative or very positive association with the word. Or it doesn't mean anything to you because you've never ever witnessed what it could mean to witness God. And I used to hate this word, as I think it is extremely triggering to most people, and many stop listening once they hear it. Because so many preconceived notions immediately start to build up when you hear somebody say the word God. But my assertion, which is also very arrogant, is that when I say the word God, is that I mean what it actually is. Like, there is something in reality, we could describe it this way, and this is what I'm trying to point to. Not from a societal understanding, not from a position of belief, but from a deep nature of all things that you have direct access to. Like, you can experience a reality that is selfless, co-creating emptiness, that flows through all things and is identical to you. God is not a personal being. It is highly impersonal and omnipresent. And it's also what you can find in the nature of compassion, goodness, and benevolence. That's what religions have been saying since forever. It's clearly the case that we have not just imagined God as some abstract personhood or concept, which we have, but it is trying to point to something much more deeper and fundamental that we are living every second of our life. These are all features of reality that can't be denied once seen clearly. And God is really the way to describe it if it is seen fully. But if it is not seen fully, well, then it sounds automatically dogmatic. And it's not about playing like word games or trying to map onto something that has absolutely no way to map to, which I mean, yeah, in a way, God is so much transcendental than humanity is, or like what the reality is. You can also use the word universe. It doesn't really matter to me. But the universe is so much more immense than what we can imagine. That it doesn't really map onto well whenever we use the word, but we're still trying. Words are pointers, and they never are the same thing as what they're pointing to. But they are definitely pointing to something. This is why you can understand the words that I'm saying here. So words do point to something real. There's no purpose either to just deny language. It's really in this ability to construct language for pointing to truth, and deconstructing language pointing at truth. So you have both sides, right? You use language for deeper understanding, but also the ability to completely destroy it for deeper understanding. This is the way of the spiritual path. The better you are able to hold seemingly contradictory views in your head from an epistemological level, like from your deep-rooted beliefs, what you really think the world is, reality is, when you can hold multiple views of this at the same time, you'll see that your mind will literally expand. You become smarter in your thinking, because instead of rejecting parts of reality, you start to integrate it as a seamless whole, and you'll just become more happier and confident as a person, because you understand who you are. There's no denial or doubt about it. That deepens your connections with life and people around you too, because you're just more authentic and more free form. Think like this, and you'll find your way to awakening quicker than most. If you get lost in concepts like frameworks and ideas, it's really mental poison and like poison for your life. A lot of this deconstructive work is a work of eliminating fear, because fear is often what hides in this constructing of systems or belief systems. And I really would urge you to watch this video next to go deeper into these layers of fear and self, to deconstruct more of what you are